Vamos a empezar. We're going to start. I'm super excited to welcome you to our first lecture of the Musicology Colloquium series, which I coordinate. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ana Alonso Minuti, Professor of Musicology, Associate Chair of the Music Department, and Coordinator of this series. And I am very honored that Dr. Carmella Scorcia Pacheco is starting 2026 series today with this presentation. She's currently a postdoctoral fellow with the Hispanic Southwest Studies Program in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese here at UNM. As many of you know, she's a native Nuevomexicana and a UNM alumni, and she has dedicated her research to the study of Nuevomexicano oral traditions. Her broader research interests include borderlands expressive culture, 18th and early 19th century corridos and inditas, archival studies, community fieldwork and ethnography, community engaged scholarship and pedagogy, and Spanish as a heritage language. Her work has appeared in notable platforms such as the New Mexico Historical Review, the Journal of the Southwest, Border Lore Online Journal, New Mexico Poetry Anthology, Intersecciones Hispánicas, and Smithsonian Folklife magazine. Prior to returning to UNM this year, she held academic positions at New Mexico Highlands University, the University of Cincinnati, and the University of Arizona. Dr. Scorcia Pacheco is deeply committed to community-engaged scholarship and to an educational approach that connects students to their cultural roots while fostering a strong sense of belonging. Today's talk is part of her current research pursuits, which examine the folkloric record to recover feminine-voiced narratives from 19th and early 20th century New Mexico. Through the lens of Balladry, she explores Nuevomexicana women's and girls' rights in contexts ranging from New Mexico's suffrage movement to the only legal execution of a woman in territorial New Mexico. I would like to thank the Department of Music, the Latin American and Iberian Institute, and the Department of Spanish and Portuguese for helping make this event possible. My graduate assistant, Melissa Rios, is circulating a signing sheet and also some handouts that Dr. Scorcia Pacheco prepared. Please make sure to sign the signing sheet to stay informed for future events, and if any students need credit for concert music, also do that. Today's presentation will last approximately 45 to 50 minutes, and it will be followed by a time of conversation and discussion, and also there is a small reception. We encourage you to stay for as long as you would like. And as a courtesy, please silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Carmella Scorcia Pacheco.
So, muy buenas tardes. Gracias por venir hoy. Thank you, Ana Minuti, for organizing this, and thank you to the Latin American and Iberian Institute, the Department of Music, and let's see. So, this is particularly meaningful for me since many of you study music or are interested in New Mexico's history and folklore. Y quiero comenzar con un consejo que me dijo Bad Bunny. ¿Cuántos me entienden bien? Los que no deben sentarse al lado de alguien que les haga el favor. Bueno, de Bad Bunny, gracias por haber estado hoy. So New Mexico has been long associated with its rich cultural heritage and myriad folkloric forms documented by various folklorists of the region. Due to the omission of Mexican-American women's history in the official U.S. historical record, I investigate and recover highly poetic and feminine-voiced folkloric balladry known as inditas and corridos of Nuevomexicanas in the U.S. Southwest borderlands during the long territorial period of New Mexico from approximately the 1860s to the 1920s. So, stemming from the Spanish verb correr, meaning to run, corridos function as a means to spread the news while highlighting themes of social injustices. They became highly popular during the Mexican Revolution, are very well known throughout the borderlands, and especially in New Mexico as a form of oral tradition. Ballad scholar Martha Chu Sanchez mentions that the corrido is the precursor of Chicano literature in that it is a form of resistance, critique, and denunciation of cultural, historical, and physical erasure under the occupation of the Southwest after the Mexican-American War. It functions as what I call a form of social media, providing an opinionated stance about an issue or a theme. The ballad is highly poetic with 8 syllables per line, with the second and fourth line having an assonance rhyme scheme. So although corridos have been noted as being a highly male-dominated genre in both its form and function by scholars, in my work I shift the focus from the masculine to the feminine in both the corrido and the indita, enabling us to reimagine Nuevo Mexicanas through the ballads. So like the corrido, inditas conform to a similar format in providing place names and including the alternating assonance rhyme schemes in each of the 4-lined verses. But in contrast to the corrido, the indita is primarily in the first person. So it's noted for being one of the most valuable expressions of oral history in New Mexico, and as one of the musical forms that most reflects the spirit of El Rio Grande del Norte. It's a musical ballad genre that flourished in New Mexico at the beginning of the 1800s, second or third decade of the 19th century. And so here I have an example so you can see some of the differences. So here you can see that on the second and the fourth lines, entrar and votar, padecer, comer, we see that assonance rhyme, meaning the vowels rhyme within that. But we also see with the indita the first person, mis trabajos, mi padecer. So you can see a little bit of how they're formed. So the 2 of the ballads used for this study include El Corrido de la Votación, a satirical ballad narrating the fight for the right to vote in New Mexico, and La Finada Paula Ángel, which recounts the tragic legal hanging of a young woman in territorial New Mexico. I will present 2 different modalities of each of the ballads, including a cappella recordings and recent renditions of the ballads by acclaimed singer-songwriter Lara Manzanares and New Mexico roots group Lon Piñón. I argue that through sentience and the sensorial, each modality allows listeners to reimagine Nuevo Mexicana histories. I further argue that depending on the modality, the active participatory role of listening renders different meaning depending on contextual factors and oral transmissions. How is it that one creates meaning through each of these modalities? How does it change from the a cappella versions to renditions with musical accompaniment? How are listeners engaging with both a politics and ultimately a power of listening? So to answer these questions, I build upon practices of what have been described as the auditory turn, which explores the, quote, increasing significance of the acoustic as simultaneously a site for analysis, a medium for aesthetic engagement, and a model for theorization. Increasingly within this auditory turn, scholars are embarking on what is termed as sound studies within the past 2 decades or so, and the sensorial. These include works such as Margit Frank's Entre la voz y el silencio, la lectura en tiempos de Cervantes, 2005, Ana Maria Ochoa Gutierrez's Orality, Listening and Knowledge in 19th Century Colombia, 2014, Leah Bassel's The Politics of Listening, 2017, Francine Macielo's Senses of Democracy, 2018, Mary Quinn's Sense and Spectacle in the Age of Philip IV, Performing Empire in Word, Music, and Image, 2024, and Jesus Ramos Quitrell's The Sound of the Word, Music and Social Transgression in Lyric Poetry from the Colonia Onward, 2024. Additionally, another source I am including in this are our primary sources of the músicos, Lara Manzanares, Jordan Wax, Tanya Núñez, Karina Wilson, Santiago Romero of Lon Piñón, in addition to Julia Jaramillo and Quirina Cordova de Medina, both of the Taos area. So I'll return to many of these sources as we compare each of the modalities in the study. So I'll go ahead and introduce the first ballad, which is La Finada Paula Ángel, So I'd like us all to imagine that we are going back in time to the year 1861 in Las Vegas, New Mexico. At this time, New Mexico was a territory of the US after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo signed in 1848. With this territorial status came many changes which had a direct effect on women's rights. Historian Janet Lecomte explains that in the Spanish and Mexican legal traditions, women enjoyed the status of persons under the law. They had the right to work and earn money, inherit and own land and property, and sue and defend in court. Many also kept their maiden names after they were married. Much of this changed, however, once New Mexico became a territory of the US and directly impacted the women of the ballads covered today. So as I mentioned in the introduction, La Finada Paula Ángel, or the late Paula Ángel, recounts the tragic legal hanging of a Nuevomexicana during territorial New Mexico in the mid-1800s. Several versions of what exactly happened exist. One version has Ángel, also affectionately known as Pablita, was perhaps around the age of 19 years old at the time when she lured her lover Miguel Martín into meeting her. Ángel, upset with his unrequited love, embraced Martín for the last time and killed him. There are other versions of what transpired that day, but what is certain is that Ángel was sentenced to death by hanging after the all-male jury convicted her of first-degree murder on March 26, 1861. I stress all-male since women in New Mexico were not allowed to serve as jury members in the U.S. court system until nearly a century later in 1951, well after suffrage for women in New Mexico was granted in 1920. So, the variant used in this study starts off with the following verses that you can see here. They're also on your handouts on one of the sides. In this version, Ángel pleads for her community to forgive her. She advises others not to follow her footsteps, and she bids her farewell or despedida. This version has a total of 14 verses, and each verse has, again, 4 lines, and 2 of the lines repeat themselves and become what are called coplas. The repetition within each copla reinforces the lyrics, and the assonance rhyme scheme fulfills the poetic structure and adds to the musicality of the text. The beginning starts with what ethnomusicologist Brenda Romero notes as an indigenous frame. Rather than starting the ballad with a date, as traditional corridos often do, the point of reference is the natural world. So from the beginning, we see the Rio Sapeo's current flows through the narrative, encouraging us to feel its waters as its currents ultimately hold the memory of this story. Yet through oral tradition, various versions of the ballad spread from community to community, making La Finada Paula Ángel one of the most well-known inditas of New Mexico. So through each of the orally performed variants, participants are engaged with what has been considered one of the most expressive forms of conveying emotion, music. Furthermore, when researching the emotional resonances of a cappella music, a vast majority of sources point to the singing qualities. Yet how is the listener engaging with what can be characterized as the raw, unadulterated, and highly intimate sound qualities of a cappella music? A cappella, derived from Italian meaning according to the chapel, is unaccompanied music, which was common in chapels and churches in Europe before instrumentation. The a cappella version for La Finada Paula Ángel used for this study is performed by Julia Jaramillo of the Taos area and was recorded in 1986 for La Música de los Viejitos by Jack and Catherine Leffler and Enrique Lamadrid. So as part of this presentation, I'd like to have your feedback. So as we're listening, we're going to go ahead and listen to the unaccompanied version. And we passed out this handout for all of you to record your observations in terms of recording how the music is making you feel through the senses. What do you see as we're listening to it? What do you envision? Do you taste or do you smell anything? What physical sensations arise? And what do you hear? Whether or not you understand the lyrics, please go ahead and record how your senses are affected on the handout provided, and at the end, we'll collect them, and I'll get to see your responses. So let's go ahead and start. I'm only going to play about a minute of this version, so keep in mind, what are your senses telling you in terms of how the music is affecting you? So here we go.
En el río de Sapeo comenzó la suerte mía, en el río de Sapeo comenzó la suerte mía. El maldito me insistió a hacer tan grande avería, el maldito me insistió a hacer tan grande avería. A Las Vegas me llevaron, dice el alguacil mayor, que a Las Vegas me llevaron, dice el alguacil mayor. El cura me aconsejó, por el ejemplo miraron, el cura me aconsejó, por el ejemplo miraron. A muerte me sentenciaron porque maté a Miguelito. A muerte me sentenciaron porque maté a Miguelito.
I hope you had a chance to record perhaps what you saw through the music, what you felt in terms of what you heard. So this is just an exercise, no pressure if nothing came about, but so I'll continue. In primary auditory observations include the feminine voice, a nasal tone from the singer, and the singer's raised pitch on the third syllable at the beginning of each copla. Additionally, not only are the lyrics repeated with each copla, each verse is repeated sonically. The sound itself is repetitive. How do each of these characteristics influence somatic interpretations of the history surrounding Paula Ángel? That is, how is sentience influencing the listener's role in interpreting this history through the aural? To relate this, I draw upon ethnomusicologist Jesus Ramos-Quitrell's study, The Sound of the Word, Music and Social Transgression in Lyric Poetry from the Colonia onward. He uses what's known as aural poetics, introduced by Alex Chavez, to, quote, point to a relational process between writer and reader, which renders the former visible upon aural perception of the latter, or which renders the writer visible by the aural perception of the reader. He elaborates how the reader of a text holds a participatory role who actively engages with metaphors to decode the text to produce meaning. This process, he mentions, makes metaphor an aural register which allows difference to be recognized sensorially. I extend this notion of the text to one which is both written and aural. In this case, metaphors of the aural register abound. The feminine and nasal qualities of the singer have the potential to imbue sensations of that between a grandmother and grandchild. Through this a cappella intimacy, she rocks the child to a dreamlike state of reimagining this. The repetition reinforces the lessons that she selects to sing. Mexican folklorist Margit Frank extends this notion as the aural moves through spatial and temporal aspects which weave together both the textual and the social. As such, Jaramillo, the singer, influences cultural memory as she functions as a mediator, transmitting the history through the poetic and through the aural. Her voice, and her voice alone, is the central feature. Although the narrative has strikingly cold qualities with its lyricism, the aural features provide physical sensations of warmth, allowing for this history to be imagined with care. And now we're going to listen to the next version. And similarly, if you have any sensations that come up, I encourage you to write them down under the handout for La Finada Paula Ángel. You can also follow along with I put the first 8 verses for the lyrics. So this one was recorded in 2023, performed by acclaimed singer-songwriter Lara Manzanares. She and Felix Peralta, sitting here, also just won several awards at the Hispano Music Awards just this year for their music. And And of course, Lone Piñón, including multi-instrumentalist and vocalist Jordan Wax, along with bassist Tanya Nunez atrás, fiddler Karina Wilson, and guitarist Santiago Romero. So let's go ahead and listen to this version in its entirety, which is about 4 minutes. And you'll see the lyrics, some of the lyrics on the screen. And go ahead and add your notes if you'd like. Let's see.
En el río del Zapello comenzó la suerte mía. En el río del Zapello comenzó la suerte mía. El maldito me insistió a ser tan grande avería. El maldito me insistió a ser tan grande avería. A Las Vegas me llevaron, dice el alguacil mayor, que a Las Vegas me llevaron, dice el alguacil mayor. El cura me aconsejó, por el ejemplo miraron, el cura me aconsejó, por el ejemplo miraron. Me sentenciaron porque maté a Miguelito, a muerte me sentenciaron porque maté a Miguelito. Madre mía, pa' que tuviste una hija tan desgraciada, madre mía, pa' que tuviste una hija tan desgraciada. Salí con grillos encadenada y de la prisión salí con grillos encadenada. En el campo fui a morir como los perros horcada. En el campo fui a morir como los perros horcada. Hermanitos, échenme la bendición. Adiós, mistos hermanitos, échenme la bendición. Ruéguenle a Dios infinito que mi alma tenga perdón. Ruéguenle a Dios infinito que mi alma tenga perdón. Santo niñito de Atocha, refugio de pecadores. Santo niñito de Atocha, refugio de pecadores. Por tu amada madrecita, sácame de estos clamores. Por tu amada madrecita, sácame de estos clamores. Dolores, eres pura e infinita, quien oye mis clamores como piadosa y bendita.
So immediately we hear a different ballad emerge. From the beginning, we hear the accompaniment of the guitar and the bass, which lures the listener in to hear more. We then hear the crisp and clear melodies through the vocalist Lara Manzanares. The performance builds up to the musical accompaniment of the fiddle, which creates a complexity of tensions felt somatically. Manzanares mediates the ballad as she chose the melody and the verses to sing. She sings in the traditional New Mexican dialect, as we can see with the use of tuvites in the sixth verse. The oral poetics in this case functions as a fusion of sorts. Ramos Cottrell mentions the work of metaphor and oral poetics points to a politics of recognition in terms of the discourses of taste and feeling through which people establish claims of belonging. In this case, the musicians work in tandem with their listeners, establishing such claims of belonging. By utilizing the traditional New Mexican Spanish of the area, Manzanares celebrates the vernacular as she shares it and as she belongs to it. Listeners can also claim their belonging by participating, feeling, and processing the musical narrative somatically. They also mediate the ballad through this meaning-making process. So for example, the chord changes noticed with the fiddle offer a shift of the somber into one that is hopeful. Ramos Cottrell further points out that more than words alone, it is the movement produced by the music, both moving the words and inspiring feelings in the listener, that makes the performer central to the text's realization. And in this case, the performers, in plural, make this happen. Dr. Brenda Romero points this out with the dancing characteristics of the rhythm we hear. So as Ramos Cottrell also mentions, the movement of the music and the internal movement experienced by the listener through the feeling caused by the music unfolds a temporal register different from that of the poem. This movement with the chord changes and with rhythmic dancing qualities contributes to a hopeful vision of not only imagining the past, but a vision of hopefulness for the language and the oral tradition to be shared in the future. So I'd like to emphasize that each of the musicians worked to create this rendition based on their own musical backgrounds. The ballad is transformed into one which is a community of performers, each sharing their own musical tastes and influences. So in each of these versions, they are performed, again, in the first-person narrative voice, and the singers mediate the ballad while embodying Paula Ángel. Yet each version offers the listener a different experience. So in comparing the a cappella version to the rendition of La Finada Paula Ángel, I'd like to draw on a conversation I had with musician Jordan Wax of Lone Piñón. I'd also like to draw upon Mary Quinn's work, Sense and Spectacle in the Age of Philip IV, which highlights the role sentience and the sensorial worked to question the dynamics of empire portrayed in festival culture and celebratory acts of early modern Spain. When exploring central themes of sound represented in early modern paintings on display in Madrid's El Prado Museum, Quinn notes the importance of not solely focusing on sound as a central theme, but rather to focus on the experience and the effects of the aural. What are the experiences and effects of listeners with each of these versions? So here the unaccompanied music is performed by a female figure who is most likely, we can imagine, performing it in the intimacy of the home. As I discussed with Jordan Wax, in the case of Julia Jaramillo, we can perhaps imagine and feel the care she presents to the piece, such that her performance has a timeless and universal quality to it. He mentions it's a comfortable vocal register. There's a gentleness and calmness to it that is not theatrical. He adds, something you see across the board is that much of the unaccompanied vocal tradition, they're dramatic songs and they're never delivered with a sense of drama to the dramatic parts. The dramatic parts are delivered the same way as the introduction, and that's a really good way to process trauma. To be calm and not to be replaying emotion, but replaying the scene in a very peaceful way. In this way, Julia Jaramillo takes great care in transmitting a violent history. The traumatic narrative received by the listeners is neutralized to not overwhelm them or the possible grandchildren who are engaging with this traumatic history. So in a recent presentation by Northern New Mexico's musician who just also received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Hispano Music Awards, Steve Chavez relates sonic repetition with community. Because the often repetitive melodies of corridos and entregas can be extensive, spanning throughout the verses, Chavez mentions that their sonic qualities become embedded in the community. In the more contemporary rendition, Lone Piñón encourages a reimagination through tensions that are explored through both the language and the musicality. Wax encourages listeners to explore these tensions and to engage with the meaning-making process as an interpretive exercise. For example, by choosing to use the Spanish vernacular, he compares this to creating a film and setting the stage for the audience to engage with the performance. The listeners then decide why they're hearing this. Is it because this is a voice from that time? Is it because this is a story from that time? Is it because the song comes from that time? This is the role of the active and engaged participant, and each one may arrive at their own conclusions. In terms of the chord changes and the mode, he mentions that this is not something that is heard often amongst this genre of music. So it shifts, he says, from the universal to something different, where he mentions, we're trying to force you back into something strange, to give you a flavor that jars you out of the habitual. Common characteristics of musical flavors in the Southwest borderlands shift and entice the listeners to engage in a new meaning-making process. So speaking of these shifts, we're going to see this again differently in El Corrido de la Votación. So let's go with, oops, there we go. So El Corrido de la Votación, or the Ballad of the Vote, also referred to as La Votación, is a satirical narration that challenges gender roles at the time through both its form and function. It provides insight into an historical account of how Nuevomexicanas organized, mobilized, and arduously convinced their male counterparts for suffrage, which was ratified just over 100 years ago in 1920. In the ballad, women are forming formidable women's clubs, running for office, and are driving trains, while men are staying home, governing the kitchen. And so indeed, Nina Otero Warren, pictured here, worked to form many of those women's clubs that were essential in the suffrage movement of New Mexico. Among many of her roles in state politics and education, she also ran for the House of Representatives, the first woman in New Mexico to do so. She's now featured on the newly minted quarters as part of the Women in U.S. History series. So keep an eye out when you go to the car wash. You may just see her cara en una cuadra. So for a more contextual and ethnopoetic analysis of the ballad, I encourage you to read several of these popular articles. There's a podcast. There's also a peer-reviewed article, Voces Nuevomexicanas. But I want to go back to the sensorial and to these listening exercises. So we're going to go ahead and listen to the a cappella version. This one is performed by Quirina Cordova de Medina of the Taos area, and she's pictured here. She learned the ballad when she was about 9 years old, when her grandma Isabel, who went blind at the age of 27, would sing it to her in the kitchen. As an adult in 2004, Quirina was recorded singing La Votación as part of the Smithsonian's traveling exhibit, Corridos Sin Fronteras, A New World Ballad Tradition. Her version is also included in the collection Nuevo México Hasta Cuándo, an anthology of New Mexico ballads. So we'll go ahead and listen to the first part of the ballad, and if you feel inclined, please go ahead and record your observations in terms of how this version affects your senses, if it does so at all. So here we go.
Año de 1844 al entrar, se concede a las mujeres el derecho de votar. El gobierno americano, por tener sabiduría, les concede a las mujeres derecho a ciudadanía. Ya se juntan las mujeres, se ponen a platicar. Comadrita de mi vida, la elección se va a probar. Ya se juntan las mujeres, hacen un club de señoras. Cambian sus candidatas también para gobernadora. Ya se juntan las mujeres, se ponen a platicar. Y abandonan sus quehaceres, ellas se van a votar.
Okay, so if we solely focus on the lyrics of La Votación, we see clamorous themes of empowered women in its lines and words. Women are not backing down. They are determined to vote. Later in the ballad, we notice lyrics that mock gender roles at the time as they are taking action and letting their voices be heard. Underneath the satire, however, the lyrics confront social change in women's lives and communities. If the listener doesn't understand Spanish and hears only the melody of the ballad, a more melancholic and lamenting tone emerges due in part to the song's minor key. To some, it may even sound like a funeral dirge. And PR producer Alex Spiegel explains if you use a minor key, you can make even something with a positive message and fast tempo sound emotionally complicated. In Francine Macielo's The Senses of Democracy, she illustrates what she calls sense work as a means to understand culture. The sensorial, she describes, has a definitive role in defining democratic practice and rebellion, cultural crisis, and social change. She mentions, the senses are powerful agents to tell us about cultural progress. They illustrate how human perceptions protect us from danger. They announce the power of individual bodies against the authority of the state. And they allow us to narrate stories of pleasure, pain, and resistance. The juxtaposition between political events of the suffrage movement and how they are felt somatically or through the body can tell us much about cultural dynamics. And in this case, La Votación functions as a vehicle, enabling its listeners to engage and participate in this history that has been so often disregarded in public learning spaces. Through sound, we are able to reimagine the histories of Nuevomexicana women fighting for change in their communities. In relating the eerie tone of La Votación to empowering themes of gender mobility in the borderlands, we can see just how complex the environment was. I propose that the satire combined with the melodic irony alerts listeners to the perpetual struggles that women confront in their daily lives and have met throughout a complex history, and that la lucha sigue, the battle continues in confronting and attaining gender equality. So, the final piece we will be listening to, again performed by Lara Manzanares and Lone Piñón, also recorded in 2023. We'll do the same thing. I promise this last time I ask for your notes if you feel like it. So see if you notice any differences in terms of how it's resonating with you through your senses. How do your senses affect what is envisioned throughout the piece? And how does the accompaniment and instrumentation affect this as well? So I'll go ahead and play the entire piece. This is about, again, 4 minutes, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Año de 1884 al entrar se concede a las mujeres el derecho de votar. El gobierno americano, por tener sabiduría, les concede a las mujeres derecho a ciudadanía. Ya se juntan las mujeres, se ponen a platicar. Comadrita de mi vida, la lección se va a probar.
Comadrita de mi vida, ya mero se va a probar.
juntan las mujeres, hacen un club de señoras, cambian sus candidatas también para gobernadora. Ya se juntan las mujeres, se ponen a platicar y abandonan sus quehaceres y ellas se van a votar.
Comadrita de mi vida, vamos ya para votar.
Amigas que me reflejan, todos los que están casados y ahora ya ni se quejan al gobierno de los estados. Amigas que me reflejan, todos los que están casados y ahora ya ni se quejan al gobierno de los estados. De las elecciones todos los hombres se unieron de ver votar las mujeres que llamaban la atención. Ya quieren manejar los trenes y también las oficinas. Que se quede el marido gobernando la cocina.
Que se quede el marido gobernando la cocina.
El gobierno del estado trabaja una nueva ley de quedarse gobernado cada hombre por su mujer.
Cada hombre gobernado, hay millos por su mujer.
Reciban sus oficinas, secretarias, juez de paz, cambien sus candidatas y suspiran para demás. Reciban sus oficinas, secretarias, juez de paz, presidenta, ingeniera y suspiran para demás. Machos que no se animen, tengan bondad de no estorbar. Ya vamos todas a la lucha, no hay tiempo que esperar.
Ya vamos todas a la lucha, no hay tiempo que esperar.
Okay, so in this version, a whole new outlook is noticed. The corrido suddenly has interludes, and it's not running per se. Instrumentation accompanies the dialogue that occurs between man and woman, emblematic of the fight women had to involve and convince male counterparts their worthiness of the vote. Tempo changes emphasize key musical and contextual movements. So as seen in this slide, when the tempo slows down, listeners are drawn in to emphasize women running for office and driving trains. When the tempo picks up, listeners become engaged with the power of the music as women in unison sing "Que se quede el marido gobernando la cocina," while men stay home governing the kitchen. This is followed by the fiddle guiding the listener to the next part, where we see it happen again with the government imposing a new law de quedarse gobernado cada hombre por su mujer. The pacing entices the listeners to engage with the tempo changes while they envision both satirical and contextual movements. The bright mandolin adds an optimistic outlook as it breathes new life into La Votación while celebrating both the past and future outlook of Nuevomexicanas making change in the state. It culminates with the fiddle as the tempo picks up and the empowering vocals rally the listener to support women in leadership. The addition of presidenta and ingeniera reflect the great strides women have made in STEM fields and aspirations women have for the future. So in closing, we can see how each of the modalities presented creates a different experience for participants to imagine, feel, and resonate through the senses. From neutralizing trauma through the repetitious melody in La Finada Paula Ángel to creating danceable rhythms in the rendition, listeners engage with the music somatically. Changes in tempo draw the listener in as multiple vocalists sing in unison. Power is also felt somatically, encouraging the listener to join in rallying for women's rights in the case of La Votación. In each of the pieces presented, the senses are invoked to reimagine Nuevomexicana histories and futures through their musicality. And I'd like to finish with this notion of a politics of listening, drawing from sociologist Leah Bassel. She notes that listening is an area relatively understudied in social and political life in comparison with voice and speaking, and argues that the politics of listening can disrupt, quote, the politics of listening can disrupt power and privilege and harmful binaries of us and them with the aim of political equality. Regardless of one's political stance, music has the potential to unite, to come together, and to feel on our own terms. If we utilize a politics of listening, we can work to, quote, ensure that unheard voices are listened to in moments of heightened tension and anxiety. And we can do this through the music. In this case, La Votación works to hear the unheard voices, the Nuevomexicanas of the suffrage movement who remain unnamed, and the women who are so often omitted in the institutional archive, such as Paula Ángel. And even if the language is not entirely understood, that is, even if the listener is not fluent in the language spoken or performed through the music, the listener is engaging with both the art and the politics of listening by listening to those who have been historically unheard. In essence, we hold a great power in how we imagine and reimagine our histories through a politics and ultimately a power of listening. Gracias. Yeah.